Hello, welcome to our study. And as always, we want to approach this study with a sympathy for the world. We're constantly being informed about all the suffering there is in the world, and we should have some sense of the value of what we're doing presently as being very much about addressing really what is the core cause of suffering. Of course, we can identify suffering as external circumstances for sure, but at the same time, there's also so much of the suffering that we have which has a lot to do with our relationship to our consciousness, our mind, our personal sense of happiness, and how we're coping, able to relate to the realities around us. And that's where it's very helpful for us to gain experience in this field. And it's not just for ourselves, but for anyone that we're connected to. So very much keeping in mind the larger community of not just humans, but also the birds, the fish, the bugs, the mosquitoes, the creatures or whatever they might be, seen and unseen. Of course, within our cosmology, then we generally just operate with what can be seen physically. But in most other cosmologies, we take into account all those that we can't see, those whose bodies are not visible to us. So we should understand that really sentient beings are infinite. And when we're studying something like the way of the Bodhisattva, it's a big topic. We're thinking as big as we possibly ever could. We're thinking beyond what is really actually that's an important point. With the Mahayana, we're going beyond what is conceivable. You could say we start with what is conceivable. There's a fair bit of rational, hard logic that's basic to the understanding of the Mahayana, but also the implication of that is really discovering that reality also falls outside of this ordinary rationality, this ordinary logic. So we need to be taking that into account. And yes, we are working with the inconceivability of all life. You just look up at the sky and wonder where it ends. That's where the number of sentient beings, they end. So we need to think big. And presently, the topic here is really engaging in a vision of practice that is intended to embrace this vastness, and also in doing so, enable us to practically connect with that vastness, not just leave it as a sort of a nice belief or a nice dimension that we just count on being there, but very much as integrating this directly as our personal scope and our personal experience. And that's where in the Buddhist teaching, we speak about the path. And the path is really where we eliminate the confusion that obstructs our understanding of reality and allows for realization or insight into what lies, you could say, what is the nature of reality that we overlook. So we talk about elimination and realization as basic to the path. And we connect and commit to the path through this journey of the Bodhisattva. And that's where we presently are studying this incredible pithy instruction, which was presented really in the form of exquisite poetry and also very capably translated into English. There's several translations. I'm partial to the Padmakara translation, which I think is exquisite, but there's a lot of very good translations. We've had translations of this text because it is so important for more than 60 years. In the 60s, there was Marian Mattix, I think his name was, who translated it. And since then, we've had various other translations as well. And then we have what we particularly are referring to here, then, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's, you could say, summary of this of this fifth instruction. So that's what we're looking at. So we're presently in the second chapter, which is on the basis of having in the first chapter identified the value of this magnanimous attitude of mind, which is basic to the Mahayana path, namely the vision and the practice of bodhicitta. And then the second chapter is very much about us actually creating the conditions for that and coming clean. It's a chapter that is translated as confession, but it involves also the act of generosity, giving, making. There's some beautiful. I hope you all have the root text itself, and also we read a few of these lines from the text last time in His Holiness's commentary, but just really all the offerings that we make and the imagined offerings. It's just such exquisite. I mean, you wanna soak your mind in the imagery of this. And then also simply coming clean, acknowledging that, yes, on the basis of my confusion, my particular states of mind that I then have enacted and created patterns around, yes, I have sort of essentially engaged with and created patterns of neurotic destructive action. And that's reasonable enough. That's predictable in the condition of samsara. But then we know that there's a bit more to it than that. Then we're not obliged to be stuck with that. So that's where we come clean. And that really is understanding that our primordial nature is free from these conditions. So that's very much the celebration, and that's very much the implication of what we mean with the practice of confession in a Buddhist context. Like I always like to highlight, which is that in Tibetan, the word for confession is shakpa. It means we just leave aside. We understand that there's some patterns that are not helpful, and then we leave them. We park them by the curb. We leave them where they are. We don't need to drag them along. So that's where we're determined to do that. And then His Holiness is then towards the end here talking about the taking a refuge in the teaching and understanding really the value of the teaching, why the teaching of the Buddha has such value. And again, this is where we're taking into account really something that is far beyond the scope of what we ordinarily understand in terms of science that ordinarily defines our sense of knowledge of our world. This is where we're looking into a dimension of understanding that far exceeds just identifying our reality as something physical. So, we'll actually, following His Holiness's cue, then we'll just begin the study with some opening chants. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. So then the text itself, so we're up to this point here where His Holiness says, the Sutra of the Visit to Lankara. This is the Alankara, what's it called? Lankavatara, sorry. Lankavatara Vista. Lankavatara Vista Sutra, yeah. This is a very important sutra, and it's very much associated with the Yogacarya teaching. And it's incidentally also the teaching that Bodhidharma took with him to China. There was this volume of the Lankavatara Vista Lankavatara Vista Sutra that Bodhidharma took with him, and which he then it was passed down from the various patriarchs, I think. Anyway, this sutra, the Sutra of the Visit to Lankara, speaks of 5 vehicles: that of humans and celestial beings, that of Brahma, that of the Shravakas, that of the Pratyeki Buddhas, and that of the Bodhisattvas. The first 2, so that's the vehicles for the humans and the celestial beings, Klami Tekpa, and that of Brahma. So these first 2 are common to both Buddhist and non-Buddhist traditions. So they cover very much, you could say, the ordinary perception of beings in terms of ethics, in terms of even spirituality. But the last 3, they're specific to the Buddhist path in their teachings on ultimate freedom and emptiness, which is what we are usually referring to when we speak of the Buddha's doctrine. So we very often talk about the 3 yanas. And in the modern context, particularly on the basis of Chögyam Trungpa's teaching, then the 3 yanas refer to Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. But in the general Buddhist teaching, it does refer then to specifically the Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas. So His Holiness says, when we examine a teaching, we should analyze the principal points. If these stand up to analysis and proved correct, then any apparent contradictions in minor details are of secondary importance. As it is said in the treatise on logic, if the principal point is reliable, the rest is secondary. So what we could talk about here in some sense is what we come across in the Buddhist teaching, which Sangha Rinpoche often makes a point about. He makes the point, let's be clear on what really matters. And for sure, issues like when you approach a teacher, should you bring a white scarf? If so, how do you fold the white scarf? How do you unfold the white scarf? And to be honest, the teacher actually doesn't really give a stuff about white scarves. It's a Tibetan tradition. It's very nice. And if you do it, that's great. If you don't, it really doesn't matter. And the real thing that matters is actually understanding that our life is precious, that there's an opportunity to penetrate through to the to truth and enlightenment. So let's not get hung up on what is essentially secondary. Also, then the Buddha then is quoted as saying, "O monks, just like examining gold in order to know its quality, you should put my words to the test. A wise person does not accept them merely out of respect." So this is from this. This refers to this what's called the Kalama Sutta, where the inhabitants of a particular area ask, "How do we know somebody's teaching is valid?" And that's where the Buddha said, you shouldn't accept a teaching on the basis of respect, but on the basis of your own critical thinking, on the basis of your own inquiry. So His Holiness says, do not take the Buddha's words literally, simply out of reverence. Examine them and respect them only when you have seen a good reason for doing so. Of course, faith is very important for spiritual practice, but blind devotion to the Buddha is not enough. We must have valid reasons for respecting his teachings. In the Buddha Dharma, and particularly in the Mahayana teaching, great importance is attached to logical investigation. And that's a point that's made again and again. It's very nice with this sort of simple-minded faith. But the problem is simple-minded faith doesn't really take you that far. It's really just an act of convenience. Yeah, I like the teacher. I like this. I like that. And then it's sort of a rather half-hearted engagement. This, when we understand on the basis of our own investigation, really the degree in which the Buddha's insights and the Buddha's enlightenment, the degree to which it is universally relevant, to the degree to which it penetrates to all aspects of reality, then there's a much greater faith, much greater trust that takes place. And of course, since the ultimate point of the teaching lies beyond just intellectual knowledge, then yes, there needs to be a place where there is great faith, great trust. And in that context, then something can be transmitted, communicated, which lies beyond just the letter and the language. So that's where faith is essential. But we can't just say have faith. And if you don't have faith, there's something wrong with you. That's that's not going to work. And if you have faith, then you belong to the blessed crowd. And if you don't have faith, oh, pity you. That kind of um, rather narrow-minded idea of faith is not what we do in the Buddhist teaching. In the Buddhist teaching, faith, yes, it's essential, but it's on the basis of not a simple faith, but on the basis of having critically assessed and validated what it is the Buddha is saying. So that's why there's a lot of emphasis in Buddhism on what we call epistemology, understanding the valid of a particular knowledge or the value of a knowledge, why we accept something as knowledge, as truth. So His Holiness says the treatises on Buddhist logic talk about the fruit and its two aspects, the manifest aspect and the veiled aspect. For us ordinary beings, the fruit of Buddhahood remains obscure. If we wish to realize it without going astray, we have to take the path that unites means and wisdom, for it is based on valid principles and reflect the true nature of the teaching. So we can assess what is empirical in terms of the external, the manifest. We can observe stuff, but we can also understand what's happening within ourselves, and in terms of our particular mental conditions, how they operate in terms of cause and effect. This we can understand in terms of what is manifest. But there are aspects, of course, in the Buddhist teaching, such as the law of karma and understanding exactly the law of karma, while we can understand the logic of the law of karma, and we can understand it through inferential logic. We can see that just like the external world operates on cause and effect, similarly also our mind operates on cause and effect, and we can also see how actions that have been that we have engaged with previously, they stay within our consciousness and manifest in later times, for example, in dreams. So that's where there's aspects of our mind which are not exactly empirically or tangibly manifest, but at the same time, we can understand them implicitly. But there are details which are not really the scope unless we actually have eliminated confusion. Just like we might not, there's certain things that we as ordinary persons don't have access to, and they could say, for example, molecular science. They understand an aspect of reality that is veiled to ordinary persons, but on the basis of their particular technology and their particular apparate and so on, then they can observe things that are normally not seen. Similarly also, but then again, we have an implicit trust in these persons, in what they're observing. And similarly also, there's an implicit trust in the sages and what they have seen. So there is a place in which something like Buddhahood, it might not be obvious to us, or certain aspects of how you could say samsara and nirvana play out. But then again, there's a trust in the sages of in terms of what they have seen. And also what's interesting is that from the time of the Buddha for 2,500 years, pretty much all sages, and that's not out of some sort of loyalty to the Buddha or the faith or the institution, sages have confirmed the findings of the Buddha. And so this is where we operate then with an epistemology that is based on what we could call authoritative sources. So that's where there is the reference to then scriptures and sages and so on, and their statements with regards to what is obscure. However, for us to engage in this, or rather for us to eventually penetrate through to seeing this, then there is a journey. There's a very real journey, and that's the journey then that His Holiness speaks about, the path that unites means and wisdom. Wisdom being the goal, and means being the skillful ways in which we engage in this journey, in which we apply our particular situation and make it a vehicle for the discovery of wisdom. And that is then where we talk about a valid path. So His Holiness says, to practice correctly, whichever path we follow, we should never go contrary to common sense. Within Buddhism, there are many different teachings for beings of different dispositions and degrees of receptivity and intelligence. This is why there exist the different vehicles of the Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas. For the same reason, the four philosophical schools, the Vibhashikas, Sutrantika, Chittamantra, and Madhyamika, and their numerous branches emerged to respond to different intellectual capacities. So those of you who follow the Sunday program, you will know that just last Sunday we were talking about these four philosophical schools, and they reflect really the different vehicles, the Shravaka vehicle, the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, and the Bodhisattva vehicle. And they are essentially different ways on the basis of capacity and degrees of insight, and also you could say aspirations. Then there are different approaches and different ways of understanding reality. So this, we're not going to go into greater depth here, but it is something that's quite helpful for us really to get a perspective on how we're approaching a greater insight and knowledge with regards to our reality. So that's where in the Buddhist teaching, there's a lot of emphasis really on just, as the basis for our practice, to have some idea of how reality can be validly understood from different perspectives. Okay. So now chapter 3, embracing bodhicitta. Now I just found out that the chapters here are not exactly the same as in the text itself. Here in the third chapter is called Taking Hold of Bodhicitta. So His Holiness says, in the third chapter, which deals with the generation of bodhicitta, Shantideva begins by rejoicing. Shantideva says, with joy I celebrate the virtue that relieves all beings from the sorrows of the states of loss, exulting in the happy states enjoyed by those who yet are suffering. I revel in the stores of virtue, cause of gaining the enlightened state, and celebrate the freedom won by living beings from the round of pain. And in the Buddhahood of the protectors I delight, and in the grounds of realization of the Buddha's heirs. Their enlightened attitude, a notion of great good, that seeks to place all beings in the state of bliss, and every action for the benefit of beings, such is my delight and joy. So this is so beautiful. And of course, what Shantideva is saying here is just so greatly rejoicing in those that really wish that others be free from suffering. And that is the inspiration of the Bodhisattva. And it goes, again, this goes beyond what is imaginable. But it starts off with just this spontaneous rejoicing. So His Holiness says, we rejoice in the good qualities and positive actions of others. When we rejoice in the good qualities and positive actions of others, we accumulate merit ourselves. By rejoicing in our own positive actions, we increase and strengthen their effect. On the other hand, if we show off the few good qualities that we have and are jealous of those of others, we do not even deserve to be called practicing Buddhists. So we should rejoice in all positive actions, whether of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, or ordinary beings. So of course, rejoicing is this incredibly beautiful capacity to be happy when others are doing something wonderful. It's the place of delighting in others, and it has nothing to do with us. It's such a beautiful thing. So that's really that's something to pay attention to. Next comes the request for the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma and not to pass into nirvana. This is followed by the dedication of merit. So Shantideva says, and so I join my hands and pray, the Buddhas who reside in every quarter, Kindle now the kindle now the Dharma's light for those who grope bewildered in the dark of pain. I join my hands, beseeching the enlightened ones who wish to pass into nirvana. Do not leave us wandering beings in blindness. Stay among us for unnumbered ages. Through these actions now performed, and all the virtues I have gained, may all the pain of every living being be wholly scattered and destroyed. So beautiful. Just, I've read this before, but as you get older, and these things, they just sort of the greatness of this just increases. Anyway, His Holiness says, now begins the actual generation of bodhicitta, both aspiration and application. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step abode and trained, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself. Now, those of you who actually join us here in the morning at 7 a.m., this is actually what we chant prior to doing the prior to chanting the Heart Sutra and then doing sitting meditation. If anybody is interested, you can, I think, go on the si.org.au website or email or be on the mailing list of Siddhartha's Intent anyway. Then you can get links, and that would be, what would that? That would be like 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. What would it be? Sort of what, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time? Maybe not. No, it would actually be the other way around, isn't it? 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Anyway, and Central European Time, a little bit difficult. That's something like 11 p.m. or something like that. But anyway, for 7 a.m. here in Australia every morning, we do this practice. And so, hey, you're all welcome to join. And this then is where we chant these 2 lines from the Bodhicharya Avatara. And this is where we aspire to emulate the Bodhisattvas of the past. His Holiness says, aspiration bodhicitta is the vow to generate the same intention as the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the past. Application is the vow to accomplish as they did all the activities of the path to enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Now pay attention to this here, because these 2 really are essential aspects of what we call bodhicitta. The aspiration bodhicitta is the vow, and essentially to generate this intention that is that of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's the wish to establish all beings in freedom. Application is then to follow through. That's actually the application of the path. But first, basic to the Mahayana path is this wish to simply just want all sentient beings to be free, to be happy, and so forth. And the application is then to, like it says here, step by step to abide in those actual trainings. So this is called the bodhicitta of aspiration and the bodhicitta of application. Sometimes it's translated slightly differently. So His Holiness says, today we shall only take the vow of aspiration. To do this, we will read through the 2nd and 3rd chapters of the Bodhicharya Avatara up until the 2nd line of verse 23. So His Holiness says, try to concentrate on the meaning and afterwards rejoice in what we have done. So this is actually where His Holiness then is giving the Bodhisattva vow. So he says, in order to take this vow, we should imagine that in front of us are the Buddha and his 8 close disciples. So these are the Bodhisattvas that we have here: Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, Vajrapani, Kashyagarbha, Chitigarbha, Sarva Nivarana, Viskamban, Maitreya, and Samantabhadra. The 6 ornaments then being Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Asanga, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, and Dharmakirti, and the 2 supreme teachers, these being Shantideva and Chandra Gorman. Okay. Including two supreme teachers, including Shantideva. Yeah, I'm not sure that it's not Chandrakirti and Chandra Gorman, but this is just me being argumentative. and then that's why also I think His Holiness mentioned Shantideva along with these. Anyway, and all the realized masters of the Buddhist tradition, in particular the holders of the Sakya, Gelu, Kagyu, and Nyingma schools of Tibet. In fact, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Consider also that we are surrounded by all the beings in the universe. With this visualization, we shall now read the 7-branch prayer. So actually, as we're doing this, there's no reason for us not to effectively do this, which generates a great atmosphere, very meaningful ambiance. So then we read, may I be a guard for those who are protectorless, a guide for those who journey on the road, for those who wish to cross the water. May I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. May I be an isle for those who yearn for land, a lamp for those who long for light, for all who need a resting place, a bed, for those who need a servant. May I be their slave. May I be the wishing jewel, the vase of wealth, a word of power, and the supreme healing. May I be the tree of miracles, for every being, the abundant cow, just like the earth and space itself, and all the other mighty elements, for boundless multitudes of beings. May I always be the ground of life, the source of varied sustenance. Thus, for everything that lives, as far as there are limits to the sky, may I be constantly their source of livelihood until they pass beyond all sorrow. These two, so His Holiness says, these two last lines are very powerful, are they not? Which is, may I be constantly their source of livelihood until they pass beyond all sorrow. The lives of a great many beings depend on the presence of the 5 elements. So let us think, just like the earth, may I support beings as numerous as the sky is vast, and as long as they have not attained enlightenment, may I devote myself entirely to their happiness. His Holiness says, let us make a heartfelt wish to attain Buddhahood for their sake and vow never to give up this thought. If some of you are not Buddhists or feel that you're not able to keep such a vow, then you need simply think, may all beings be happy. Those of you who wish to take this vow of aspiration, please sit up straight or kneel on your right knee and fold your hands. Repeat after me 3 times the lines I'm going to read in Tibetan. These are the first 2 lines of the verses 23 and 24, preceded by teachers, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas. Listen. I have visualized the Buddha in front of me, and you should consider that I'm sort of a messenger or intermediary. Consider that we're surrounded by all the beings in the universe and generate compassion for them. Think of the Buddha and feel great devotion to him. Now with compassion and devotion pray, may I attain Buddhahood, and recite. Teachers, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, listen. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring birth to this awakened mind. Teachers, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, listen. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth this awakened mind, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind. Teachers, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, listen. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind. And His Holiness says, when we recite these lines for the 3rd time, at the words, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, think that you have generated this bodhicitta in the depth of your hearts, in the very marrow of your bones, and that you will never go back on this promise. His Holiness said, traditionally, we now recite the last 9 verses of the chapter as a conclusion to take the vow. Now that we have taken this vow, we should try to be good human beings in our daily lives. Try to be good human beings in our daily lives. You can hear His Holiness say this. So he says, we should not, for example, pretend to be very nice while we are in this tent and start fighting with each other as soon as we get out. This was taught under a marquis in Dordogne in France. So he says, we should from now on try to have a positive and kind mind. We're going to be happy in this life. I really think that the future depends on the quality of one's mind, on a good mind. So we must try to be good people and be good example for those around us. The initiative to be like this has to come from each one of us individually. Then he says, thank you all for listening so carefully. I myself try to practice bodhicitta in all situations, and I try as much as possible to encourage others to do so. I find it is a practice that is entirely without danger and brings tremendous benefit. So I think we're quite fortunate to here be in the company of His Holiness and to be undertaking this study under his guidance. I had the fortune to attend His Holiness teaching the Way of the Bodhisattva in Dharamsala in 1995. And this was this was obviously wonderful. And I remember also His Holiness, sometimes in the middle of the teaching, just speaking on the suffering of sentient beings, he would actually burst into tears. And all of us, I think we would have been, 1,500 people or something. All of us, of course, I don't think anybody was not profoundly affected by that. Very much, there's so much value of this that lies in the fact that this comes down to us in the context of a living tradition. His Holiness is still with us. And this is extremely valuable. Okay, so carefulness. Let's see what that is. I think that's probably what it is. Yeah, carefulness. That's how it's also translated. His Holiness says the thought of bodhicitta has now been generated in our minds. Next, we come to 3 chapters devoting to protecting it from deterioration. Okay, remember there is this prayer that we often recite, which we also recite here at the end, which is, may bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise in those in whom it has not arisen. That's the first 3 lines, right? And then it's followed by 3 lines that says, may bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise in those in whom, and where it has arisen, may it not. Okay, here it is. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. So the next 3 chapters have then to do with, and where it has arisen, may it never fail. That's what we're now looking at. Once we've generated this, and we could say that we generate this on a very powerful, positive inspiration, but then let's be realistic and take into account our habitual patterns. And that's where we need to deal with them. We can't just wish them away and say, now I have reinvented myself. I'm no longer the older person I used to be. That's rather naive. The old person that we used to be, for sure, it is in the past, but there's this interesting, unfortunate part of our delusion, which is that we drag the past with us in this naive belief of a continuity. And that's where we are habituated to essentially this place of ignorance that we call the old ground, in which all these habitual patterns, they still surface and become part of our construction of ourselves. These can be remedied, but we need to take them into account. They're predictably there. This fundamental confusion and all the impulses that come with that. And that's where we then need to be proactive in, you could say, meeting this, facing off this condition. It's not particularly a battle, but it's just that we need to be intelligent in dealing with it. So that's where the next 3 chapters, they are then devoted to protecting this noble vow that we have taken from deterioration. His Holiness says, this mind of ours has the potential for accomplishing all the qualities of Buddhahood. But these qualities are temporarily obscured by our mistaken belief in the existence of an I, and by the self-centeredness and negative emotions. These are the powerful enemies of the positive attitude that we have generated. They live within our minds. They're not outside. So it's not as if we have to battle with demons particularly, or that we're up against some incredible force of darkness. But it's more not just that we need to be aware of these. And when we're not aware of them, that is when these tendencies, they fester. They fester in the dark. You take them out, you shine the light on them, and they're pretty powerless. But as long as we choose to look away, then they have the opportunity to really grab hold of us. And that's where they then achieve some power. And these are then this is where we shouldn't underestimate their capacity for these neurotic tendencies, that they can actually create very painful existences for us. Again, this is not that we're being punished in any way or we've done anything fundamentally wrong, but because of confusion and the insecurity of fixating on me and the whole battle of struggling with we perceive of as the other and the objective realm, then we perpetually generate these conditions of samsara. And this is where we're very often in a very painful place. And where does this come from? Well, it doesn't come from some external enemy. It doesn't come from just a random sort of phenomenon that just happens, but it is due to particular causes and conditions that we can attend to. So just like if we're wary of not attracting particular virus, etc., then we also should be attentive to not being subject to the power of these self-centered and negative emotions. It's very doable, and the condition is curable. His Holiness says, were they substantial external enemies, we might, even if they were armed with missiles, have little time in which to run away from them. But there is no escape and nowhere to hide from these internal enemies. As circumstances arise, all sorts of negative emotions, such as desire or anger, can suddenly spring up. There are numerous antidotes for these. The most important thing, though, is to apply carefulness, attentiveness, and mindfulness. We need to always be on our guard, so that if a negative emotion or thought arises or is about to arise, we're able to use these tools and to employ the antidote immediately at the very moment that the mind is disturbed. When we practice in this way with carefulness, negative emotions become less and less powerful. Carefulness is the subject of the 4th chapter. I should also say that Paltu Rinpoche famously said that with regard to the teaching of the great perfection, Dzogchen, Ati Yoga, he found the most helpful pith instruction for that was this 4th chapter from the Way of the Bodhisattva, chapter on carefulness. Okay. See if there are not any questions. All right. Well, in that case, I guess I'll just continue. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Is the live studio audience.
We're talking about an I that gets in the way, that there is the I that's wishing for the body, for everyone to be free from samsara and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
How do you differentiate between these two?
Okay, very good question. We're talking about how the delusional fixation on I, the self-centeredness, is clearly something that is a non-existent delusional condition, but nevertheless we do employ the notion of I when we, for example, aspire to enlightenment and to benefit all sentient beings. So you could say the I that is constructed by the mind, it's a delusional condition that really fails to know itself. And that's where, on the basis of failing to know itself, there's a sense of I that emerges that essentially operates with an insecurity of me versus other. And on the basis of that, struggling within that condition. So with the sense of I, once we have it there, there's two ways we can employ it. One is to align itself with that which is beyond self. And that is essentially what we do with the practice of bodhicitta. That is really when we say, the fact is we operate with an I, we experience an I, practically speaking. But that I that we're operating with, it can go two ways. And one is it can be perpetuating further suffering, which is when we're operating with self-centeredness. And they can also go in the way of selflessness when we begin to think of others. So there's really two ways that we can go with this I. One is that goes in the direction of sanity, and one is the way that goes in the toxic condition of further suffering. So we're presently operating, it's true, you could say the notion of operating with myself and all sentient being, it still operates within the realm of duality, but it is within the realm of duality, it is what we call the skillful means that enable us to break out of this delusion. So essentially we should understand really as I can go two ways, selflessness and self-centeredness. And so with the practice of bodhicitta, we're very much putting it on the path of selflessness. And this ultimately will take us beyond delusion altogether. When rejoicing in the qualities and actions of others, how do we determine that they're good qualities and positive actions without being subjective or dualistic? We can't really go beyond being subjective or dualistic. But you know, the good thing is that's where we could give others the benefit of the doubt. there's actually nothing to be lost. Of course, if we're happy that somebody's creating suffering for others, that's obviously not great. But in general, life offers a lot of opportunities for us to just think, oh, that's wonderful. So there is a place where we could see this in a very, well, as Trungpa Rinpoche sometimes uses the word folksy. We could apply a kind of folksy attitude where we just simply say, that's really wonderful what this person is doing. For us to actually really know what other people are doing is very difficult indeed. But we could sort of, in this case, there's nothing really to be lost in just rejoicing in the practices of others and the goodness of others' actions. How can I apply bodhicitta in daily life when I don't come into contact with many people, as we are in lockdown? Don't worry, they're still out there. Is the aspiration to apply a form of application itself? Yes. And our practice is dedicated to others. Even when people go off into self-imposed lockdown for years in what we in Buddhism call retreat, that is always done with the intention to benefit others. So they're out there, and there's plenty of opportunity really to generate the bodhicitta of aspiration. And certainly within the condition of lockdown, there's actually a lot of opportunity to practice the bodhicitta of application. There's a lot of opportunity to practice. There's opportunity to practice the path, the bodhicitta application, or at least there's more opportunity, depending on what you're getting yourself into. I'd like to encourage everyone as much as you can, and of course there are, particularly these days, not that many opportunities, but in general, teachers like Tongse Khyentse Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, undoubtedly His Holiness the Karmapa, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen, and other great teachers do give the Bodhisattva vow. And so if you have the opportunity, really very good, even if you have taken it before, to take with great Bodhisattvas like that is very valuable. So hopefully as things open up, there'll be opportunity to go and receive the Bodhisattva vow. And when we receive the Bodhisattva vow, it's not as if we should think, oh, well, first I need to take this vow or that vow. We really have the aspiration to receive the Bodhisattva vow, then included in that is, for example, the vow of refuge as well. When I first came across Buddhist masters, I happened upon Kalu Rinpoche, and I received, the first thing I received was actually the Bodhisattva vow from Kalu Rinpoche. And then somebody was saying, no, but you have to actually first receive the bodhicitta, the refuge vow. But I realized afterwards that actually included in the Bodhisattva vow really is the refuge vow. Yeah.
Can you give examples of how to use antidotes in our confused state, like it's saying preparedness, carefulness, and the disturbing emotions come up? Like just a couple of examples
how to use. Okay, an antidote, an example of how to apply antidotes when disturbing emotions come up. Well, let's say, for example, there's somebody who really bothers us, and we think, gosh, this person is just so annoying, and I really don't want to see this person again. Then we should think, this person, as much as they might be, you could say, practicing things that have really been annoying, they very often do so out of ignorance. They very often innocently actually don't know what they're doing. So there's an innocence that's basic to the person. And also the particular view that we have of that person is possibly not shared by others. Other people might see the same person in a very different light. So that's where we apply the antidote of having a wider perspective. When we think in these ways, then the strength of our irritation or resentment or anger becomes less. And in the case of desire, we might think, oh, if only I had, let's say, this device, and then my life would be so much easier. And maybe I should just, yes, it might be sort of a bit of a large expense, but I really would like this device. Then try and think how often we have gotten things and they really just become a burden for us. Then we have to maintain them, they break down. Eventually, after we've had them for a while, they don't really have the luster that they initially had, and so on. And that's where we can see we very often are held by naivete with regards to desirable objects. And likewise also with anger, we fail actually to challenge ourselves in our own beliefs. We think, yes, that really is an annoying person. And we fail actually to challenge our own belief systems. So antidotes actually are what goes against the way that we've been doing business so far. So in the case of anger, we practice patience with these examples I've just given. And in the case of objects of desire, we sort of remember their unattractive features. So these are two examples. Well, I'm just going to read a few more lines here since there's still a bit of time. And this is then the, there was a question there, let's see. What you're describing, the lack of ongoing satisfaction, is that an example of all-pervasive suffering? It's really more impermanence, but it's true. It does have this element of all-pervasive suffering, and that is, of course, all-pervasive suffering is all-pervasive. So with the very notion of self and the object, whether it's desirable or undesirable, then of course the all-pervasive suffering is there. But in this case, we could just, you could say, understanding the dependent arising of anger, which is very much just from our particular reference point in how we see a particular thing and failing to see the constructed nature. Then with things of desire, we're more applying the antidote in terms of the suffering of change, understanding how things change. Yeah. Okay. Shantideva's, Shantideva didn't write this. He spoke it. There was this incident where Shantideva seemed way too relaxed to the administration at the Nalanda University. And because he was actually royalty, they couldn't really, they were a bit worried about expelling him, even though they thought he was way too relaxed and he didn't really do much. He was referred to as busuku, which just means somebody who just eats, sleeps, and defecates. And they thought, well, we're going to have to somehow get him out of here. He's really bad for the morale. And so they wanted to expose his inabilities as a student, as a serious student. So they said to him, "You're very relaxed. You must really know the Buddhist teaching very well." And he said, "Yeah." And and then they said, "Well, why don't you come and give us all a lecture? And we'll even invite the local administrators and VIPs, the king and so on." So that's where Shantideva then said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that." And they built a tall throne for him in the assembly hall. And then as Shantideva then mounted the throne, he said, "What would you like to hear? Something you've heard before, never heard before?" And they said, "Oh yeah, let's just hear something we haven't heard before." But he prefaced it with, of course, as you've seen, what he now would present would really just be something that was in concordance with the Buddhist teaching and really just summing up the Buddhist teaching for his own benefit, not presuming that it would be benefit for others. So very modestly, he then proceeded with essentially speaking this. And it's on the basis of those who were present, their memory of what he spoke. There was a few versions, some were a bit longer, some were a bit shorter, but more or less they coincided. And there was this capacity for persons to remember this. This is part of the quality of great sublime individuals, of which there undoubtedly were a few in the audience, to actually remember what was being said. So this is where we have the way of the Bodhisattva from. It was actually spoken by Shantideva. There was one work that he wrote down, and after this incident, he actually started to ascend into space. When he came to the last section, then he was actually ascending into space and finally becoming invisible. And that's where just this voice was being heard. But from that, after that, he didn't actually come back to the monastery. And then later they found him and they said, "Could you clarify some things?" And he says, "Okay, there's 2 books that I've left at the monasteries, and you'll find them above the doorway in my old cell. They're sort of behind the bricks. You can find them in there." And these were works that Shantideva had written. But the way of the Bodhisattva itself was just spoken. Anyway, then Shantideva, well, now it's up to the hour, so we'll leave it at that. We'll start with this part next time. The children of the conqueror who thus have firmly grasped this bodhicitta. We'll start from there next time. Okay. Next Wednesday and Thursday, 11th and 9th of December, His Holiness the Dalai Lama will give teachings on Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way in conjunction with the auto commentary about 5:30 p.m. Australian time. Go on www.dalailama.com/live. Okay. Thank you very much for notifying us of this. So that's the 8th and 9th September, and that's in His Holiness teaching the Entering the Middle Way, the Majjhimika Avatara. This is a really important text, actually. So just like the Way of the Bodhisattva is one of the key pith instructions of the Mahayana, likewise also Entering the Way of the Bodhisattva is one of these really important works, and particularly it goes into really properly understanding the way that we misunderstand reality, and also points to how we need to understand reality, how reality cannot be grasped, and how any attempt at actually grasping and objectifying reality as having a solidity that we attribute to it, actually, when we analyze, it fails. Now, the first 5 chapters, it is essentially a text that goes through what we call the various paramitas. So the first 5 chapters are really about the first 5 paramitas: generosity, discipline, patience, endeavor, and meditation. But then the 6th chapter, the chapter on prajna, the chapter on wisdom, then that is the bulk of this text, and that is where it's a very helpful text in terms of understanding reality, and it's been studied ever since it was composed by Chandrakirti back in the 7th century Common Era. It's a text that's very sharp in its logic. So that's where sometimes when we come across it, if we're not, you could say, prepared, it might be a bit overwhelming, but nevertheless, it abides by a very, the logic of it is, you could say, valid. So that's where it's a very helpful text, if we're, you could say, so inclined. So, so of course, I don't know whether His Holiness is going to be teaching from the first sections, which are quite easy to understand, or if he's going to go straight to the 6th chapter, which is then the more challenging, but I would also say the important chapter. Yeah. So thank you. 8 and 9 September, 5 p.m. Australian time, dalailama.com live. Okay. Thank you. De nada. Okay. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.